every Wednesday, Thursday, Church and Leaders versus the New Testament, Part 2. Hello, everybody. I am Jim McCotter, and this is Part 2. We saw in Part 1 all spiritual leaders were first elders. We will also see here that all apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers were all first elders. Pastor and shepherd are the same words in Greek and refer to the same person, a spiritual leader caring for God's flock, God's sheep, all believers. Bishop and overseer are the same word in Greek and refer to the same person. Now, elder and bishop or overseer refer to the same person, as Titus chapter 1 verse 5 and 7 and 1 Timothy 3 1 and 2 confirm. But they have different meanings. Elder relates to their spiritual maturity and qualifications. A bishop or overseer relates to their authority and responsibility. Now, there are three categories of churches in the New Testament. The first one, the universal church. Jesus said, "I will build my church." Matthew 16:18. The universal church is made up of all of Jesus' true believers in the whole world. The second category of church is the city church. The city church was made up of all Jesus' believers in a city. No place in the New Testament does it use the plural word, quote, churches, end quote, in any city. There was only one church per city, thus the city church. There was, quote, the church in Jerusalem, the church in Ephesus, the church in Philippi, etc. The word church, singular, was used 169 times in the New Testament and never plural churches in a city. A plurality of elders were appointed to work together to oversee all the believers in the church. Therefore, all the believers in the city, thus the city church. The only time the plural word churches was ever used in the New Testament was when it was referred to in a region where there were many towns, such as, quote, the churches in Galatia, or the churches in the province of Asia, etc. Third category of church was the house church. In each city, Christians would regularly meet in homes. For example, in the church in Jerusalem, many thousands were saved, and all the believers met in homes, functioning as home churches. In Jerusalem, there would have been hundreds of house churches. The believers gathered for church in homes, sharing together, and I quote, the word, fellowship, breaking bread, and prayer, and eating their meals together in gladness, end quote. Here's the reference to confirm all this, Acts 2:42, Acts 2:46, Acts 5, verse 42, Acts 8, verse 3, Acts 12, verse 12, and Acts 20, verse 7 and 8. Paul and his fellow apostles spent over 3 years in the city of Ephesus, and it was one of their greatest works. Historians have said there were as many as over 1,000 house churches in the city of Ephesus. There were many house churches in Rome, Priscilla and Aquila being one, Romans 16, verse 3 through 5. In Colossae, some Christians met in Nympha's home, Colossians 4:15. Paul writes to Philemon and greets the church that met in his home, Philemon 1:1 and 2. There are a total of 22 places mentioned in the New Testament where just believers got together, and they were only house churches. The apostles spoke daily in public places, such as the 12 apostles speaking daily in Solomon's court, and the apostle Paul reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus and in the marketplaces. But none of these places were ever considered as church gatherings. They were evangelizing and teaching to reach out to new people in the cities. But when they met with just believers in what we call church, they only met in homes, sharing the word, having fellowship, breaking bread, and praying together. Two places that especially are examples of this is Acts 2, verse 41 through 46, and Acts 20, verse 7 through 11. It was not until the 4th century, for over 300 years, that Christians always met in homes, and they didn't stop until the 4th century, when Constantine the Great had Christians start meeting in the large buildings previously designed for pagan worship. Then Constantine and his mother, Helena, started constructing more of these same large pagan-formed buildings. This was not Christ and the apostles' New Testament church plan, or their design or model. It was the pagan building model and their worship format. A big stage up front where only the pagan high priest would stand and speak. Big buildings with this model and format was what the Roman emperor and his mother fostered on all Christians at that time in history. And to my amazement, most spiritual leaders have continued to follow this same unbiblical model and format ever since. It would not be so bad if it was only considered an extracurricular Christian activity today. But the problem is this: spiritual leaders today have substituted this pagan model for Christ's New Testament church model. Sad to say, man's proud tradition has been to the great detriment and demise of world Christendom. If you like, listen to this example. How about yanking out good spark plugs in a beautiful car, replacing them with bad ones, and then boasting about following the manufacturer's design model or their design manual? Such a car may still run, but will never run as fast and beautiful as the manufacturer designed model. Christ has given us his church and leadership design from his design manual, the Bible. It's not the Roman Constantine model. Prior to Constantine, one of the main things churches did every week, but no longer could do, everyone brought food to share in a full meal together. The Lord's Supper was indeed just that, a weekly full meal. Acts 20, verse 7, quote, "On the first day of the week we came together to break bread." This was Greek for having a meal together. Jude referred to the Lord's Supper as, quote, "a love feast," Jude 1:12. It was never a little thimble juice or tidbit wafer. In Corinth, some even got drunk during the Lord's Supper. Paul condemned them for that. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 20 through 22 and verse 33, and I quote, "So then when you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat, for when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? So then, my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, you should all eat together." End quote. The abuse was corrected, but as a result of the abuse, we can clearly see that the Christians came together to eat a full meal. Even when Jesus instituted taking bread and a cup to remember his body and blood, Jesus did it when they came together to have a meal. Gathering for a meal is Jesus and the apostles' New Testament church. Jesus even said in church context, and I quote, "If 2 or 3 gather in my name, I am there with them," Matthew 18:20. In New Testament church, when the believers came together, 1 Corinthians 14:26 says, each one, end quote, could have something to share. Or in 1 Corinthians 14:31, "For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all may be exhorted." In fact, there was not only opportunity for everyone to share when they had church, but Paul encouraged it. 1 Corinthians 14:39 through 40, quote, "Therefore, my brothers and sisters, be eager to prophesy, but in a fitting and orderly way." Though elders may have done most of the teaching, certainly some of the time all others had opportunity to share. The last church mentioned in the Bible was the Laodicean church. This is the only church where it mentions Jesus came to it. And what did he do when he went in? He ate a meal with them. Revelation 3:20. Today's church, Christians go for what they get from it. New Testament church, Christians went for what they could give and share with it. They would all share their food, share in fellowship, share in prayers, and share the word. Acts 2:42. Today's church, Christians are, quote, puffed up with pride, fat, spiritually bloated. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. They come, sit, and listen. New Testament church, Christians gathered to 1 Corinthians 8:1 says to edify one another. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says to stimulate one another, to encourage one another. Today's church, Christians are spectators. New Testament church, Christians were participators. Elders oversee city church. There was only one body of elders in a city, and they were appointed and united to oversee all the believers in that city, a city church. The 12 apostles, as we saw, were also elders, and they were together overseeing the city church of Jerusalem, all the believers in Jerusalem. Acts 13:1 says, now in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simon called Niger, Lucius, Cyrene, Manon, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. There were 5 spiritual leaders overseeing all the believers in this city, the church at Antioch, end quote. Now we see in Acts 14:21 through 23, then Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, and appointed elders for them in each church per city. They always appointed a plurality of elders over each church or in each city. As even Titus chapter 1 and verse 5 says, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you would appoint elders in every city, a plurality of elders per city. After all doctrine related to the gospel, the doctrine of unity was most important. The Apostle Paul wrote more to each church in each city related to their unity than any other subject. And this was the only thing Jesus prayed specifically for us. Quote, perfect unity. John 17, verse 22 and 23. When spiritual leaders divide in a city, they create one of the greatest New Testament sins, dividing Christians in the same city. Christians divided by separate pastors in the same city. This was the first sin above all other sins that the Apostle Paul condemned with the one church of Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10 through 13. Moreover, according to Jesus' prayer, all the world will not know about Jesus if Christians are divided. Wow. Are spiritual leaders today unwilling to let Jesus' prayer be answered? Are there any pastors in the city willing to die to self and let Christ be head of his church? There are a lot more practical issues that are important to address on this subject, which I discuss in my book, Unity or Divide and Be Conquered, in jimsbookstore.com. Don't you think God would move mountains for us in our cities today if spiritual leaders let Jesus' prayer be answered? Christians being united in their city like the New Testament church? We'll pick up with the next Wednesday and Thursday. Tomorrow is Jesus' national mandate.